I've talked about a lot of mustelids, or members of the weasel family, on this podcast: otters, badgers, wolverines, mink, and ermine, just to name a few. And today, I want to talk about another one. Now, it caught my attention last week while I was doing some research, both for being the smallest member of the weasel family, and I'm going to share those at the end of the episode. But also, despite their small size, they're one of the most heavy metal animals around. So stay tuned, because today we're talking about the least weasel. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, and this is the Dispatches from the Forest podcast. As I've mentioned before, when it comes to the common names of animals, least and greater are generally a reference to the size of the animal relative to other species in the same family. It's not an insult to the weasel's character. This weasel is also known as a little weasel, if it makes you feel any better. There's 18 recognized subspecies of least weasels, and the so-called nominate subspecies is the common least weasel, which is widespread. It's native to Eurasia, North America, and North Africa, and has been introduced in several other places, including New Zealand, Malta, and Crete. In fact, the IUCN classifies the least weasel as a species of quote-unquote least concern, due to its wide distribution and large population throughout the northern hemisphere. So don't confuse the common least weasel with the least common weasel, which would be something else entirely. Throughout their range, their preferred habitat are fields, open woodlands, parks, or gardens with bushy and rocky areas at elevations up to about 9,800 feet, or 3,000 meters. Like all weasels, least weasels have a long, slender body with short legs and tail. But the size of least weasels varies greatly over its range, to an extent rarely found among other mammals. Average body length in males ranges between 5 and 10 inches, 130 and 260 millimeters, while females average between 4.5 and 8 inches, 114 and 204 millimeters. The tail can be anywhere from half an inch to 3.5 inches, 12 to 87 millimeters in males, and 2/3 of an inch to 2 2/3 inch, 17 to 60 millimeters in females. As for weight, males weigh in between 1.3 and 8.8 ounces, 36 to 250 grams, while females weigh just 1 to 4 ounces, 29 to 117 grams. This variation makes the subspecies Bang's least weasel, which ranges from northwestern Canada south into Minnesota, North Dakota, and Montana, not just the smallest subspecies of least weasel, but the smallest living mammalian carnivore in the world. The least of the least weasels, if you will. The color of least weasels also varies geographically, as does the pelage type. In northern subspecies, the fur is soft and silky, while those that live farther south have coarser fur. The back, sides, limbs, and tail are usually some shade of brown, while the underparts are white. Sometimes the tip of the tail is a little bit darker, but it's never black. And while that seems like a minor detail, I want you to remember it because it's going to be important later on. The line delineating the boundary between the brown upper parts and white underparts is usually straight. And at high altitudes and in the more northerly part of its range, the coat becomes pure white in winter. The winter fur is dense but short. The summer fur is also very short but sparser and rougher. Now, least weasels mate in the late spring to early summer, April to July. After a gestation period of just over a month, the female gives birth to an average of 6 kits, which she'll raise without help from the male. The newborn kits are pink, naked, blind, and deaf, but gain a white coat of downy fur after about 4 days. By 10 days old, that margin between their dark upper parts and light underparts becomes visible. Their baby teeth, called milk teeth, erupt at 2 to 3 weeks of age, at which point they'll start to eat solid food, although their mother will continue to nurse them for as long as 12 weeks. The eyes and ears open at 3 to 4 weeks of age, and by 8 weeks, they're able to kill prey on their own. Shortly after that, anywhere from 9 to 12 weeks after they're born, the family breaks up. By 3 to 4 months old, the young have reached sexual maturity themselves, but males are usually unsuccessful at mating in their first year. Least weasels only have a single litter each year and live an average of 7 to 8 years in the wild. Now, the least weasel has what's been described as a typical mustelid territorial pattern, which is a way of saying that the males have exclusive ranges that encompass the smaller ranges of multiple females. The size and population density of a territory will depend heavily on prey abundance and reproductive success, meaning that the social structure and population density of any given territory is generally unstable and flexible. Male least weasels extend their ranges during the spring mating season or when there's food shortages. They mark their territory using feces, urine, and secretions from the anal and dermal glands, which are deposited by dragging their butts and rubbing their bodies on the spots they want to mark. And these are vocal little guys too. They have 4 basic vocalizations. A guttural hiss is emitted when they're alarmed, which is interspersed with short screaming barks and shrieks when they're provoked. When defensive, they make a shrill wail or squeal. During encounters between males and females or between a mother and kits, the least weasel makes a high-pitched trilling sound. And aggression is expressed by using lunging and shrieking, while subdominant weasels will emit submissive squeals. Now, least weasels live in dens, but they don't dig their own den. Instead, they'll nest in the abandoned burrow of another species like a mole or a rat. The burrow entrance measures just about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters across and leads to the nest chamber, which is located about 6 inches or 15 centimeters underground. The nest chamber is used for sleeping, rearing kits, and storing food, and it averages 4 inches, 10 centimeters in diameter, and is lined with straw and the skins of the weasel's prey. Like I said in the intro, these are pretty metal little guys. I mean, come on, sleeping on the skins of your enemies? That's a boss move. And that's the other thing that makes the least weasel kind of a badass. Despite their small size, least weasels are fierce hunters. Now, they mainly feed on small mammals, things like mice and voles, although they'll sometimes take frogs, fish, birds, or eggs. In England, in fact, field voles are a favored prey of least weasels, but field vole populations fluctuate from year to year, so in years when field voles are abundant, they can make up over half of the weasel's diet. In years of vole scarcity, though, birds form a much greater proportion of the diet, and female least weasels may fail to breed. But that said, they're not exclusive hunters of small animals, and if the opportunity presents itself, they're capable of taking down prey like rabbits, hares, or grouse, which can be 5 to 10 times heavier than themselves. Now, to be fair, rabbits that fall prey to least weasels are usually younger, and they tend to be a more important food source during the spring when small rodents are scarce and rabbit kits, on the other hand, are plentiful. Male least weasels take a higher proportion of rabbits than females, as well as an overall greater variety of prey in general, which makes sense because they're a little bit bigger and they have bigger territories than the females, meaning more opportunities to hunt a greater diversity of prey. The least weasel forages under cover to avoid being seen by predators like foxes and birds of prey. Its small size makes it well adapted to pursuing prey down tunnels, though it may also chase prey out of a burrow and kill it in the open. Now, small prey like voles are dispatched with a bite to the base of the skull or the neck. Larger prey typically die from blood loss. When food is abundant, they might only eat a small portion of the prey they kill, usually the brain. But least weasels consume 30 to 35% of their body weight daily. To put that in perspective, That would be like me eating 50 pounds, over 22.5 kilograms of meat every day. That's a lot of meat. Now, in addition to foxes and birds of prey like owls and hawks, least weasels are small enough to be preyed on by other mustelids like martens, polecats, and ermine, as well as snakes like black rat snakes and copperheads. Least weasels are more vulnerable to predation than their ermine cousins, not only because they're smaller, but because they lack that black tail tip. I told you we'd come back to that. That black tail tip serves as a way to deflect predators from their head. In places where their ranges overlap, least weasels and ermine compete for prey. The least weasel manages this competition by living in more upland areas, feeding on smaller prey, and by their ability to enter smaller holes. And they actively avoid encounters with ermine. I mean, you'd skip the family reunion too if you thought your extended family was going to murder and eat you. That said, female least weasels are less likely to stop foraging in the presence of an ermine, relying on their smaller size to escape quickly into those smaller holes if they need to. Okay, one last strange fact before we get into the myths that put the least weasels solidly in my crosshairs. Least weasels are commonly infected with a species of nematode, the adults of which are found in the nasal sinuses and can damage the skull. You would think that would be bad, but there's no evidence that it has any serious detrimental effects even on heavily infested animals. So I guess it's okay? But still, I'm going to pass on having nematodes in my sinuses. Thank you very much. So there's several myths involving least weasels. The ancient Macedonians, basically the ancient Greeks, believed that seeing a least weasel was a good omen. Isn't that nice? But they also apparently believed that if a woman suffered from headaches after having washed her head in water drawn overnight, that a weasel had used the water as a mirror. Not quite sure how that tracks, but okay. And they would also refrain from mentioning the animal's name for fear that it would destroy their clothes. And there's a similar superstition in southern Greece, and that was that the least weasel had previously been a bride who was transformed into a bitter animal and would destroy the wedding dresses of other brides out of jealousy. I guess in ancient Greece there was a lot of weasels running around tearing up people's clothes. Other myths, though, seem to lean more into the least weasel's heavy metal badassery. For example, Pliny the Elder, early Roman author, naturalist, and military commander, believed the least weasel to be the only animal capable of killing the basilisk, a legendary reptile reputed to be a serpent king that could kill anything with just a glance. According to old Pliny, though, the basilisk's weakness is the odor of a weasel. The weasel was thrown down the basilisk's hole, easily recognizable because the surrounding shrubs and grass had been scorched by its presence. Unfortunately, according to the story, the weasel also dies in this process. Now, the legend of the basilisk and its association with the weasel in Europe was probably inspired by accounts of certain species of Asiatic and African snakes like cobras and their natural predator, the mongoose, which is somewhat weasel-like in appearance, but not in fact a mustelid, and maybe a topic for a future episode of this podcast. In Inuit mythology, the least weasel is credited with both great wisdom and courage, and whenever a mythical Inuit hero wanted to accomplish a great task, he would generally transform himself into a least weasel. But my favorite myth comes from the Ojibwa people, indigenous peoples of the northeastern woodlands and subarctic region of North America. The Ojibwa believed that the least weasel could kill the dreaded Wendigo, a mythical creature often said to be a malevolent spirit, sometimes depicted as a creature with human-like characteristics who might even possess human beings. It was said that the Wendigo caused its victims to feel insatiable hunger, the desire to eat other human flesh, thus imbue them with a propensity for murder. In some representations, the Wendigo is depicted as a giant humanoid with a heart of ice, whose approach is signaled by a foul stench or sudden unseasonable chill. So how did the Ojibwa think this diminutive but fierce least weasel took down the Wendigo? Well, by rushing up its anus, of course. Yep, death by butt weasel. It doesn't get more metal than that. And that, feral friends, seems like the perfect place to end this episode. Thank you as always for listening. If you'd like to support the podcast, here's how you can do that. Become a patron. Subscriptions start at just $5 a month, and with 3 paid months, you get free Dispatches from the Forest merch. Find all the details at patreon.com/dispatchesfromtheforest. You can donate either through PayPal or Venmo using my email address, dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com. Also, how you can contact me with any questions, comments, or requests for a future episode. You can also donate using the Cash App and the hashtag ForestNerd. You're welcome to send a check. Just message me for my mailing address. And of course, there's Dispatches from the Forest merch for sale. Go check out the merch store at cafepress.com/shop/Dispatches from the Forest. Click on products and see everything we have to offer. Finally, you can follow Dispatches from the Forest on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. Dispatches from the Forest recognizes that the lands where we live, work, and recreate are the traditional homelands of the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho people. We understand that this land holds immense significance for the original stewards, native nations, and peoples of this region. Dispatches from the Forest podcast is a production of Dispatches from the Forest. It may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.